It's time we got down to brass tacks, wouldn't you say?
The UK is one of those fortunate countries that has enough soft power and cultural clout to be the setting of many video games, whether homegrown or developed abroad. Driving games, point and clicks, open world action adventures, bits of Uncharted, the list goes on longer than an Anglican sermon. Ubisoft have done 3 different versions of a fully explorable London. They love it. But a scant few of these games really ring true to actual Brits, because there's always something that's off. Dodgy accents, misuse of slang, small cultural details that most people wouldn't notice, but that stick out like a sore thumb if you grew up here, like, I don't know, everyone having a f***ing gun. But Atomfall, developed right here in England by the company that owns Judge Dredd, Dan Dare and Roy of the Rovers, is perhaps the most beautifully, bleakly British thing I've ever played. And here's a bunch of reasons why that is, as per the title. You know what you're getting into, there's no trick.
Not sure I like the look of you.
Atomfall is set in an alternate north of England where it's still the mid-60s, as opposed to the real north of England where they're still struggling to move on from 1945. Specifically, it takes us into a lockdown area of the Lake District in Cumbria, where a load of Fallout-y, stalkery style stuff is going down following the infamous Windscale nuclear disaster, which is a real thing that happened and is more or less England's Chernobyl, right down to the damage, the ecological consequences, and the government cover-ups. But there's no HBO series, there's no Call of Duty levels, it barely exists in the cultural consciousness. For one reason or another, the most massively underrepresented part of Great Britain in video games at least is the north of England. Known to its residents as proper England or God's country, and known to the worst people in the world, middle-class Londoners, as the empty expanse you have to go through to get to the Edinburgh Festival. And while the world's creatives seem barely aware that anywhere between East Lothian and Oxford exists, the Lake District in Cumbria enjoys almost as much tourism as London because it's beautiful and secluded and offers a calm escape from the pressures of modern life. Yes, but also because it's places like that where ye old England still exists, where the land is pocked with mossy villages, ancient ruins, landscapes and horizons that have barely changed since Roman soldiers were marching across them. If you want to feel connected to the soul of these islands, you could do a lot worse than exploring Cumbria. And if you'd rather come here to investigate a nuclear quarantine zone and smash gnomes with a cricket bat, playing Atomfall is your only option, so you should do that instead.
Good day. You'll forgive me if I'm less than cordial on first acquaintances, I'm sure.
What gives Atomfall its unique edge is the specific influences it wears on its sleeve. Obviously, the Fallout games are something of an inspiration here, more on that later, but where Fallout's signature vibe is a distinctly American intersection of Leave It to Beaver optimism and Red Scare paranoia, Atomfall's is derived from the struggles of post-war Britain, a bruised and battered country which was the last nation to end World War II rationing, and still clearing the rubble for decades after the Luftwaffe had kindly given the worst generation of town planners in history a reason to build in Basildon and Cumbernauld. Hard times inspired great art, and it's from this bleak period that we get the Quatermass TV serials and Day of the Triffids, which have formed much of the bedrock of British genre fiction to this day. I mean, you smash those two things together and you get Doctor Who and the Daleks. All of these things are drawn upon in Atomfall, name-checked in the review guide even, and directly referenced in the game itself, along with H.G. Wells, The Wicker Man, and Mr. Bean. The line between genre fiction and folklore gets blurred by time. At this point, Doctor Who and Mr. Bean are as important to the cultural fabric of this country as Lord of the Rings and, I don't know, the Mabinogion is. Atomfall mixes all of these things together beautifully, blending things as foundational as Celtic paganism and centuries-old Cornish mining tales with modern anxieties about nuclear proliferation and COVID lockdowns, which are, of course, relatable the world over. And in a delightfully British way, this miasma of clashing paranoias is made enjoyable by the game's wonderful sense of humour.
And you by now, I want to know why not.
Start up Atomfall and it won't take very long before you find the village of Wyndham, the last place left in the quarantine zone with any semblance of normality left. What's particularly normal about it is that there's loads of bunting up, everyone's in a foul mood, and there's guys going around complaining about the troops not being respected enough. In this case, they are the troops, but it still counts. Everyone in Wyndham knows everyone else's business, and tensions are just constantly simmering below the point where someone might be forced to write a strongly worded letter. But ultimately, the people of Wyndham have more or less acclimatised to their extraordinary circumstances, living under the tin pot dictatorship of a local military commander, having to forage for food in the forest because supplies have been cut off from the rest of the country, no milk for the tea. British people are extraordinarily adept at accepting ever worsening circumstances and making excuses for them. They'd probably insist it was character building. Bloody kids today have gone soft. Back when I were a lad, we'd have given our eye teeth to live under martial law in an abandoned nuclear quarantine zone. What luxury. You should be thanking your lucky stars. We didn't have time to forage for mushrooms. We used to just have to eat plasterboard and get on with it. If this game was set in France, there'd be no village, because as soon as a local pub ran out of good booze, they'd have burnt out all the cars, overran the checkpoints, unionised with the Druids, and declared themselves a republic. Actually, that'd probably make a good sequel.
Like hell you. Right, come here. That's bad.
Lots of games set in Britain give your character ready access to firearms, but the fact is, most British people have no experience with guns, not the firing of or being shot at with. There really isn't such a thing as a gun culture here. If you have one at all, it's almost always because you need one for your job. Armed police, farmer, hitman. In contrast, North America has a gun culture in the same way most places have a car culture. Like, if you want, you can have a pink one with LED lighting, whatever you want. And it's reflected here in Atomfall, where yes, you can find guns, but not a great deal of ammo, and rarely in any kind of good condition. They're all rusted to World War II relics, or the decaying equipment of the military faction who are as cut off from the outside world as you are, and therefore you'll spend most of your time doing violence the good old-fashioned British way, with a cricket bat and a forcefully applied Dr. Martens boot.
Stamping it out like it owns the place.
One thing that a lot of visitors to these islands are struck by is how many different accents there are in such a relatively small and densely populated country.
State of this place. Leave tomorrow if we could.
There is no British accent. Accents, pronunciations, even the slang can change dramatically in 5 miles. And people move around a lot here, for work, for uni, for shits and giggles. Walk down any high street in Britain and you're guaranteed to hear a load of different accents from around the country. Atomfall reflects this in the voice cast, though it does have that Oblivion thing where there's clearly only about half a dozen voice actors for hundreds of characters. You will hear a wide selection of regional British accents, and a couple of Irish ones as well for good measure.
Keep it civilised. No troublemakers.
The most realistic touch, in an accurate reflection of real life, wherever you go, there's always a surprise Welshman. Doesn't matter where you are. Cumbria, Bristol, Middlesbrough, Falkirk, there's always a surprise Welshman. Even this video has one. I was born in Swansea. Surprise!
Pay attention. This village is under military occupation per the quarantine protocol.
British people love drinking tea. We never shut up about it. It performs a lot of functions in our society as a social lubricant for different occasions. If you're starting a big project, you'll have a cup of tea first. Trying to solve a problem that's just come up, have a cup of tea and think it over. Accidentally snap the neck of the local baker? Better have a cup of tea to calm the old nerves. There's nothing in here. There's plenty of authentic British cuisine in Atomfall. There are Cornish pasties, cream cakes, raw potatoes, luncheon meat, which I think is an American invention, but it's just so deeply upsetting a concept that I think we've ended up owning it by default. Basically, as a British person, I'm finding Atomfall very hard to get through because it keeps making me want a Greggs. Listen, British people are renowned for their ability to sense when they should leave. Or maybe not in Ireland, or India, or Zimbabwe, or Barbados, or look, I've no got all day. The worst thing a British person can do is be a bother, which is why so many of us die of preventable conditions. Who wants to bother a doctor about being ill, as if it's literally their job, Dad? No, I don't want to be a pain, I'll sit here, dying slowly and politely, thank you. Now, it might surprise you to learn that Atomfall is actually a fairly short game. Because of the inevitable Fallout comparisons, because it plays broadly similarly to those kinds of things, you'd be absolutely forgiven for assuming that it's hundreds of hours long. In fact, you're talking 20 hours max per playthrough. There's a lot of replayability here, given how the game's various objectives and stories can change depending on the order you get around to them in, the choices you make to resolve threads, the things you miss in your first playthrough that don't become apparent until later on, etc. But generally, if you're a one and done sort of person and you like to just do a single thorough playthrough and move on to the next thing, Atomfall asks only enough of your time to tell its story and leave. Like a C of E vicar that's popped round for tea and biscuits. I don't know if that still happens. Though Atomfall doesn't play much like Fallouts 3, Vegas and 4, it's hardly unreasonable to look at the broad strokes and conclude that this is an attempt to make a British equivalent. Rebellion themselves have acknowledged this in interviews. I mean, they directly invite the comparison by having Fall in the title, right? There's loads of other things they could have called this game, like Cricket Bat Bastard, Atomic Flitting, Earth, Wyndham, Fire. Right, fine, maybe no. But it's much more streamlined and focused than a Fallout game. It's one big, interconnected mystery that you are invited to solve at your own pace, set across several small sandboxes, rather than dozens of branching stories in one gigantic, sprawling map that you never quite seem to be fully done with. And it's also clear that Atomfall doesn't have the resources of a proper, big, AAA open-world game. Although it has certainly made something comparable on a smaller scale, there are plenty of places where it shows its budget. The overall technical package feels very last gen, for example. There are no modern graphic options like ray tracing, DLSS, or frame generation because frankly it doesn't need them. But what it does have is heart. It oozes atmosphere, makes a lot of memorable choices that will stay with you a long time after playing. It's an eccentric experience that punches well above its weight when compared to a vastly better resourced American thing that is 9 times as long and has about 500 more characters. So, holding our own on the world stage with a lot less resources to do it than the Americans have, what could be more British than that? Apart from tea, pasties, making excuses for our shamefully colonial past, and casual violence, obviously.